Hi, and welcome to From Many People's Strength, the podcast that covers Saskatchewan politics and current events. My name is Cory Johnson, and my pronouns are he and him.
My name is David Richards, and my pronouns are he and him, or they and them. All right.
And I guess we got
Happy
some
holidays.
Stuff.
This is that weird week.
Yeah, that's right.
It's time sort of loses meaning during this week at the best of times or in the best of years. So this weird year is its own thing. But yet again, there were some stories that came up that probably are good for us to be touching base on.
I wanted to start a little bit with this Regina nonprofit issue with the street workers advocacy project, and one of the people that has been housed there from them is being evicted, and says she's not ready for this eviction. She's afraid that she's going to relapse. I'm not sure if we talked about this when the issue first came up, but I remember reading about it. And I thought that this would be an issue then, and now it's getting larger.
Yeah. It's one of those ones where, like, I am glad people's privacy is being respected to the level at which it is. At least I'd almost prefer we know less, because I always question how much consent is involved in the reporting of this when it comes to identifying people. So I'm a little concerned on that front. I've talked about before, like my views are pretty strongly that sex work is work. Should be protected and treated no different. We should listen to the people who work in the field as for what protections they want and implement those. Decriminalization rather than regulation, which, like, for me is sort of a centrist liberal guy, or at least traditionally that's how I thought of myself. I may be more progressive than my former identity would imply, but I'd always assumed, similar to drugs, legalization is the way to go. You can legalize, regulate, et cetera. And consistently what I hear when sex workers are talking to the media, or when I talk to people who do sex work just one-on-one, the message is no, decriminalize is important, rather than legalize. So that's definitely a place where I'm going to listen rather than talk. And I will, this, I guess, gets to be the place where I can talk a little bit. But I'm going to definitely 100% be upfront about sort of my ignorance of the lived experience of anyone involved in this story. And I don't know who's right. Like it seems, it seems like there's two very distinctly different sides, and both sides of this story would be people who I would normally default to believing when they talk to me about things, right? Like it's, so
it makes it, it's up in the air, like to some extent, like, okay, where should my, I guess, empathy lie? Where should I be, I guess not that we have to take a side, but
right.
I hate the idea that somebody's going to end up on the street and falling into an addictive pattern if they have, and they know and they feel that they are going to. But also, I guess there's been 4 other women who have come forward for this Raising Hope program, have previously worked for this Raising Hope program, and said that they felt they had no choice but to go public because their complaints weren't being listened to. Yeah.
And so nonprofits are often in a sort of in that between a rock and a hard place. So I think the cliche is that you often have nonprofits with a CEO at the very, very top who is making very, very good money, that's sort of diverting money away from the charity itself. I don't know if that is the case in any way, shape, or form. Like I said, the cliche is that well-meaning person at the top who is not from within whatever charity or whatever group of charity is supposed to support, whether it's Autism Speaks, who don't have anyone who's autistic on their board, or I would hope, and again, if you and I were actual reporters, we could go and dig deeper and find out more about this story, as to whether or not the people who are at the top and in charge of SWAP were themselves sex workers at some point in their life or still.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know what that makeup of the board of directors looks like. So I just know this is definitely one of those ones where if someone is a sex worker, listen to them and what they're saying. So if both sides of a discussion are sex workers or former sex workers, then it's going to be tough. The bringing it, where part of me goes, that's it must be both serious and also this seems kind of weird, is the bringing in authorities, bringing in police and government, that seemed
right,
an unusual step, but so that speaks to the seriousness of the issue, but also, I don't know. Maybe this segment of the podcast involves us saying to people, and I've already talked more than doing just that, but us saying, hey, this is an important story. It's important for people to pay attention to this. But I know I'm not qualified to wax more philosophically than I already have on the rights and the wrongs of it. So
yeah, that's totally fair.
Again, you may have done more research on the story than I have, so I don't know.
I just remember I read an article about when it first came, about that last month when it first came out, about her possibly being evicted and being concerned that she would relapse in her addiction if she was, and it made me wonder what's actually going on there, and we still don't actually know. So, which is fine. Also, it's just that maybe more stuff will come out in the next month or so. Yeah. Hopefully, she has support somewhere and it doesn't end up on the street.
It speaks to I guess where I can stem is it speaks to the fact that, we shouldn't need to have programs like this. I'm glad this program exists. This program is important. It is. I am incredibly happy that it does exist. I'm incredibly sad that it has to. Yeah. And it's.
It reminds me actually of a podcast. I was listening to the CBC Front Burner podcast, and they were talking about or maybe it was The Current, one or the other. And they were talking about these food distribution spaces and how some of them, all the work that people were doing, distributing food to those who needed it. And all the people who were doing the work kept saying is we shouldn't have to do this. If we had a society that gave a shit about poverty and people who were starving, then we wouldn't have to have food banks and food distribution centers and stuff like that. But
and it's I don't know. It's someone was talking earlier today about how it was on a TikTok I saw, but political commentator on TikTok was talking about how he's talking about America, but we look at the back end of problems rather than the front end. We look at and he talked about it's when things become visible, and if we address the issues when they're still invisible, it would take less time, less money, and there would be less suffering. And if we had the level of social safety nets necessary such that no one would ever have to do sex work if not by choice, and we decriminalized, then you solve a lot of these issues at the front end.
That's right.
Make the world a world where if people want to do this as their job, they can legally and safely, and no one who doesn't want to do it as their job would never have to. Yep. And again, it seems like all of the research and all of the science behind this is pretty clear that it's cheaper to do that as well, that it costs taxpayers, the taxpayer, governments, all of us, less money to start with. It is more efficient to give people their fair share of the wealth that we as a society create collectively. Because this isn't like, we're not talking about handouts to people. As a society, each individual within this society generates wealth and generates value for everyone else through things other than their paid labor. And we all, we can start getting into citizenship and who the land belongs to, but within the model of that we exist in, where we are all, citizens of a individual country, as citizens of this country, we collectively own its wealth. So giving people their fair share of the wealth that they themselves own is reasonable. Is what capitalism is supposed to do. Right? If you're a capitalist, you believe you own something, the wealth that is generated by what you own is yours. Right. And we all collectively own the wealth of Canada.
You're starting to sound a little commie there, dude.
I am starting. Someone was talking, was like, I don't like communism or socialism. What I'm talking about is super capitalism. I'm so capitalist. This is what I believe. But there's I don't necessarily, I've talked about this before. I don't necessarily believe in public ownership of all means of production. But there is certain wealth that is currently collectively owned. And, we all should have a right to our fair share of that collectively owned wealth.
I don't know if, I must have been on another podcast. I was talking to somebody about the oil that we produce in Saskatchewan, like in a very real sense. That is our oil. That's not Crescent Point's oil. It's not Gibson Energy's oil. It's our Saskatchewan's oil, the people of Saskatchewan.
Absolutely. And what we call royalties are really just the price. Like, this is a highly simplified explanation for it, but at its core, as a fundamental level, royalties are just the government on behalf of the rest of us, on behalf of the owners of that oil, selling that oil to the companies who extract it. On paper, it's slightly different. It's, they're paying for the access and but ultimately it's the people of the province own that oil. And maybe it's the people of the country own the whole countries. Maybe it's the people of each individual province own that provinces. There's ways of structuring that, but the people own that oil. The government on our behalf is selling that oil to oil companies. And royalties are the price that they are selling it for. And when you set the royalties too low, it's like owning something and screwing yourself over by selling it for less than it's worth. It's a finite resource. And again, it's not just oil, and there's some that aren't finite resources. There's renewable resources we own too that we sell off in various ways. But again, that is owned collectively, and the benefits of that should be, distributed collectively. Or we say, the other option is we just say, hey, this was all owned by the Indigenous people when we got here. We should just be making sure they get everything from it. Like, that would be the other really capitalist way of doing it. If we treat property rights as something that are inheritable, that if I own something, it is an inheritance passed on to my children by default. Therefore, all of the stuff that was owned by Indigenous people when everyone else showed up is still fundamentally theirs and their descendants, because that's how we treat everything else. So that would be option number 2.
But that we know that's not going to happen either.
We know that's not going to happen. That's the other super capitalist option. So, but anyways, we're meandering, but I think so many of these things are linked, though, right? Like it's how do you create, how do you create a just society? Because in a just society, many of these other problems that we talk about don't arise. The back end problems don't arise, and these visible problems don't arise. Yeah. You ensure, affordable housing, you ensure social safety nets, you ensure wealth is that is collectively owned, is collectively distributed, or equitably distributed. Like it's you do all of those things. You don't criminalize and prosecute sex work such that it has to be in a black market or a gray market. You do those things up front, and then you avoid so many of the other issues that come out because of it. Yeah. Because the only thing, the reason sex work is criminalized is because of social mores around it. It is not an inherently more exploitive or violent than many other things. And if many other forms of labor were treated the same way, you would have the same problems. If there was a service that was highly sought after that you criminalized and forced underground, you would have the same involvement of organized crime. You'd have the same involvement of exploitation. You'd have the same reluctance to engage law enforcement. Other issues with law enforcement come into play as well. But all of those other things come about because of the criminalization of the occupation, not because of anything inherent within the occupation itself. So.
Yep. Exactly.
So I think we've come full circle on that topic. So I don't know if there's more that you wanted to address with it.
Good.
All right. What else do we want to talk about? The other big story is the Saskatoon's water emergency on Christmas Eve. I had a number of Saskatoonian friends who were, I think it was, for so many people, it felt like that straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't I think this exact same issue happens any other year, or this exact same issue happens on November 3rd or October 15th, or, pick a random day. It's not as big a deal, but I think a lot of people had that. I can't see my family. I'm home alone. I'm already struggling with mental health. This was just one more thing. One of the things, though, that stood out to me, and I'm guessing it probably jumped out to you as well, is this disconnect between how different people within this country live. That, middle class, or not, any. Anywhere in the economic spectrum, but living within Saskatoon is not used to having this happen. It's unusual to happen within a city. It wasn't like they couldn't drink the water. It just wasn't as if it was inherently unsafe. They just asked people to limit usage because sand got in the filter. Filter if you can, et cetera, et cetera. And yet we have people in this country who have been on a boil water advisory for years, multiple years. Yeah. And how, those of us who, and you know what, don't get me wrong. If I lived in Saskatoon, I probably also would have been, that kind of sucks that, I have a Zoom call scheduled with my family and now have to limit myself to a 5-minute shower instead of a 15-minute shower. And I probably shouldn't shave before the call. Oh no. I would be okay, that kind of sucks. And I would laugh about it in the Zoom call or whatever. But we're limiting ourselves to short showers, only brushing your teeth or having, cooking. You can still do all of those things. You just need to limit them, as opposed to don't use any water at all without boiling it first. And you have to have your drinking water shipped in.
Yeah.
Like, how do we not say that that's unacceptable? That I don't care what needs to be done to make that right. We do it. Like that's just that is a no-brainer. That should, and like there's been more progress in the last 4 years or 5 years than there was in the previous 20 combined. So that's good.
Something.
And I think it's still below the bare minimum. Last week we talked a bit about, how Mo, when it came to Christmas Message and a couple other things, did the bare minimum. I don't even think we're at the bare minimum. We're like gradually creeping slowly towards the bare minimum and have, maybe we'll reach it within a couple of years at the pace we're going.
So I just read something today, I think it was, that said the goals they had set for March of 2021, they are now saying that there's no way they're going to get anywhere near those goals.
Yeah.
For cleaning up the water systems on reservations, I think it was. And like you say,
what that tells me is they are choosing not to have them met by 2021.
Yeah.
That is a choice. We have the technology to do that. Do you know how I know that? Is because when we build new developments, when brand new suburbs get created, they can have water.
Yep.
So if you can do it with something that's brand new, you're starting from scratch. Start from scratch there if you have to. Honestly, if what you have to do is rip up every single solitary pipe that's there and place new ones the same quality and the same way you would in a suburb that's 3 hours out of Toronto, you do the same thing. Now, I get there's distance, right? There's a longer distance between many of these reservations, and if they build a new suburb 45 minutes out of Regina, like a White City or an Emerald Park, right? Like, so I get that distance plays a role in that. But we can build water treatment centers for new cities. And like that can be done. Like water treatment plants get built for new developments all the time, and it's possible. It costs money to do it. This is a good use of, this is exactly what money should be spent on. Like, if we're going to spend money on anything, this should be top of the list, bar none, in my mind. Yep. And really, we don't have excuses.
No, it's I don't know what it would take to motivate the people with the money to do this, with the government to do this. I don't know.
I thought someone should bring forth a law that says if any reservation that falls within a jurisdiction you are responsible for has a boil water advisory for anything greater than 48 hours, or make it, don't even say reservation, just say if any region has a boil water advisory for any longer than 48 hours, and it is a region you are responsible for. So if you're an MP, if it's within your constituency, if you're a federal cabinet minister, if it's within your country, if you're a provincial cabinet minister, if it's within your province, whatever, you get no salary till that's fixed. Period. That's your job. Your job at its core is to and there's arguments, this is a federal issue, not a provincial issue, and I don't care. This is your number one job, is keeping people safe, right? You go back to, civil societies for 6,000 years. The fundamental reason we form together as units and collectively organized in units greater than the family unit is for mutual safety. And we have the technology to keep each other safe when it comes to safe drinking water. This is at the fundamental core of why we have society and civilization in the first place. Yeah. The Romans could have aqueducts, right? Like we're dealing with things that societies have been providing clean drinking water for millennia. This is a fundamental core bedrock foundation for what a society should provide in 2020, in
even
1920.
Even if you're a person who wants to nitpick the various other things that you think the government isn't responsible for giving you.
Yeah.
Clean water is there.
Yeah.
You have to do that.
Yeah. Or at that point you then just say, no, I'm not a libertarian. I'm a full on anarchist. I don't feel there should be government at all. And even most anarchists I know think we should be collectively creating mutual aid to provide clean drinking water. Maybe not through a government. With a capital G government, but like,
or the point of a society is to take care of your neighbors and each other. That's why we live together.
This is a rant I won't apologize for. And again, I think it was 12 hours or maybe even less. It was half a day, give or take. That privileged people had to go without not even access to clean drinking water, a reduction in their consumption of water, of clean water, of the water that still was clean.
Yeah, that's right. The water that was still clean. Oh, well.
So.
No, that's good.
So, yeah, that's that one. We've got... we had a bunch of police ticketing like crazy.
Yeah, we had a lot of people driving with suspended licenses or with unregistered vehicles in November, apparently. And I mean, you know me, I'm not big on rules and the government imposing its will on people, but there is a system in place for insuring vehicles and whatnot, and making sure that everybody who's driving is qualified. So maybe people should be, making sure their license is renewed. Driving while suspended is not just a matter of making, I guess you're sure your license is renewed. Usually you're suspended for a reason. Often impaired driving. And I guess, I get it. If my license was suspended, I'd be in big trouble. I'd have to find some way to get around that. Yeah. And it leaves a lot of people in rough shape, but.
Yeah, it's one of those ones where, because we are as focused on equal rather than equitable, I end up being torn on it because, you have circumstances where there are people who are really struggling and slipped up. And, I forgot to renew my license, because that's part of it as well. Wasn't paying attention, went over the limit. And I talked in a previous episode before about how if we put people in jail for speeding, you'd probably see an end to speeding. But all these people who are, in theory, law and order, tough on crime folk would all of a sudden sing a different tune, because it is a crime that affluent people it's one of the few crimes that affluent people tend to commit at a fairly high level, commensurate, because a lot of crime is driven by poverty, desperation, and whatnot. This one isn't. It is kind of a crime of convenience, that it's easy to do, so people do it, and there's very little consequences if you're rich, because anything that's punishable with a fine is legalized for rich people. So I can't remember. One of the Scandinavian countries has traffic tickets being a percentage of income rather than a flat amount. I like that idea. If you're caught speeding, it's 5% of your annual salary. That's huge. But right. you find the amount. And, if it's set at it's set at such a way where it's as much a deterrent for people of any level of affluence, right? If it's a percentage of income. Now, how are you measuring income? I'd be curious to see how, are they measuring it off of salary or, total taxable income and da-da-da-da-da-da. There's always exceptions.
Yeah.
If all of a sudden we see Jeff Bezos having an income of officially of zero, and therefore his speeding tickets are zero, that's a different story. But,
yeah, that's
a separate issue, and that's its own issue, I would say.
Yeah.
But as a first principle, doing it based on a percentage of taxable income.
That kind of does tie in a little bit to this article that I was apparently is a month old, but has to do with the Saskatchewan Mining Company that was kind of not paying taxes because they think they can find loopholes and they have other ways to avoid it, and they can hold up the CRA in court. And so the CRA is taking Cameco Uranium Mining Company to the Supreme Court for dodging over $2 billion in taxes. And so that's a significant amount of money.
Yep. Yeah, it's not nothing. As they say, it's money that Saskatchewan could certainly do with, is the one quote. Right. I'm like, that's an understatement. And again, this is one of those cases where it really seems like, and again, I'm speaking for a longer arm of the government here, but you tax first, and if you overtax, you give it back rather than undertaxing and have to fight and claw and struggle and eventually forgive. At least when it comes to corporations and businesses. I think that's I think that's a different element than an individual. Again, this is we are like. Above and beyond the taxation issue, Cameco is a mining company, and they're mining on federally owned land or provincially owned land in some cases. And they're extracting resources that are owned collectively. Yep. We are effectively, as a society, selling our uranium to Cameco, who then, once they've bought it, extract it from the ground. Technically, that's not actually how it works on paper. Like if you were to, if someone were to hear me say that, they go, well, that's not what it is we sell them the mining rights and they have to get it out of the ground. Like, no. Like functionally, what it is, like not when you look at the legal technicalities, but functionally, we sell them the uranium and give them permission to then go and get it.
Yeah.
You've bought it from us, therefore you have the right to go take it out of the ground now. It's yours to a certain amount. You just need to, take it out in ways that we say are safe and non-damaging. And
they're supposed to participate in good faith as a company paying taxes on their profits. So that's part of it.
I think what you'd like... And maybe you give companies, benefit of the doubt once, and be like, all right, and like it. Initially, you treat it like a fancy restaurant. You get your food first, and then you pay the bill at the end. But once you've dined and dashed once, you then treat it like a McDonald's, where you pay first, and then you get your food. Only in this case, the food is uranium.
Yeah, that's right.
But no, and I'm joking, like I'm saying this in a joking manner, but functionally, it's at a certain point you say, instead of us giving you the food up front, giving you the uranium up front, and then you pay us after, pay first. Like you've shown that this is too much of a headache. And if you set that rule up to begin with, you don't have to worry about the court piece nearly as much because, again, once your current set of contracts with these companies is up, and I'm not talking about breaking pre-existing agreements because that does involve the courts. But just next time there's the royalties are up for review by the province, Next time there's, royalty issues that come up, go, all right, this is how it's going to work from now on. You pay federal tax based on estimates on what your earnings will be, and it can be reimbursed. And if you don't like that, you don't have to buy the uranium from us, which that is where there's a risk, right? You then do have that risk of, they say, okay, then fine, we won't buy the uranium from you, and they go try and buy it somewhere else.
Yeah. But also
so there's the risk of losing business that way. But you know what? That is to some extent how capitalism is supposed to work, is, you find those, the give and takes. And if they won't do that, find another company who will. Ultimately, if you can't sell the product with terms and conditions and price that you're happy with, then you hold on to it a little longer. It's not like uranium is likely to use its value in the next 10 years. You never know. Same with oil and gas, right? Oil may all of a sudden lose its value in a decade. Arguably, it's probably going to be worth more, but...
All right. So what would we like to move on to next?
All right. So we've talked about Cameco. We've talked about tickets and speeding and drunk driving and texting. Let's see, what other stories are there? Well, we haven't touched on this week in COVID.
No, that's true.
This week in COVID.
Yeah, that's right. So
we found out that the province has been undercounting or underreporting its hospitalizations from COVID.
Yeah.
So sort of the exact opposite of what the anti-maskers are, always accusing.
Yeah, that's right. Like, my dad isn't an anti-masker so much, but he is one of these guys who's like, well, they're blowing it out of proportion. The hospitalization numbers aren't even that big, and this and that. And I read this and I thought, see, this is why you don't just assume you know more than what is going on.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have the information, that doesn't mean that you get to assume things.
Right. So, it's what it came out is, it's essentially that the province wasn't counting patients who were in the hospital because of COVID, but weren't infectious anymore. So if you were there because of COVID, but it was like post-COVID it just came down to when the complications occurred.
Yeah,
if you had COVID 2 weeks ago and now you're having lung issues, that's still a lung issue caused by COVID.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's the province's dashboard has essentially been underreported, which I seems consistent across a lot of jurisdictions that these things are underreported, and I'm always hesitant because I don't want to sound like the same people who are saying things are overreported, but it's one of the things that more and more statistics are using now is that raw death number. And it's a little like that one works better the bigger your sample space. Like the smaller your sample space, the more variation you're going to have regardless. Right. So any variation you need a larger variation for that variation to be statistically significant. Because the standard deviation is already higher. Yeah. The smaller your sample space. So in a province like Saskatchewan, that is useful, but not as useful as if you look at all of the United States' numbers. And if you compare here's where the deaths were this time last year compared to here's where the deaths are this time this year, you can get a pretty solid understanding of, what are the impacts of COVID. Or you say, okay, fine. If you think it's not from COVID, what other cause is happening right now that's causing the world to have so many more deaths, or the United States to have so many more deaths?
It's I don't know. I've been listening to a lot of people say for a while that the death toll was underreported regularly. So this, like you say, this wasn't a surprise. And I suspect that the people who think that the numbers are already overreported are going to look at this and go, this is just an excuse to inflate the numbers even more.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Well, and I don't know, one of the things that always gets me on this number reporting element is this idea that it shouldn't count if there's comorbidities.
Yeah.
And it's so disingenuous when people say that, because when you start looking at what counts as a comorbidity, we all have one. Like the overwhelming majority of people have something that would count, because human bodies suck. Like they're amazing and they're a miracle and they're wonderful. Yeah. I love spending time with them, and I miss many of them.
Yeah. But also they're fragile and gooey
and yeah, like how any this is probably more on topic for some of your other podcasts, but like how anyone can think there's an intelligent design after looking at how the human body works. Jesus.
Yeah. It doesn't make any sense.
No, right? So, and you know, when you talk about what percentage of the population is considered to have a heart issue, and what percentage of the population is considered to be overweight, and what percentage is considered to have a pre-existing respiratory issue, or like when you start adding all of those, and obviously there's overlap, right? So, you know, it's not something you just casually look at and say, okay, well, 40% has this issue, and 30% has this issue, and 20% has this issue, so it's 90%. Like, no, obviously there's going to be overlap. But I remember looking through some of what counts as, you know, what would be a comorbidity, and realistically, we, like, the overwhelming majority of people have something.
Yeah,
we all have, like, there's. And that's just how it works, right? Like and I'm glad doctors are paying attention to these things, and I'm glad when all is said and done, when they look back on it, they can understand what are risk factors and what, like, to be able to say, yeah, you know, pre-existing heart issues, pre-existing heart conditions cause this specific virus to act in this specific way. So here are things we need to do differently if we know someone has a heart issue, or if this person has asthma, or this person has diabetes, or this person is allergic to eggs. Like, these are all things that you need to pay attention to, and how it impacts people's health outcomes. But to just sort of hand wave it away and say, well, it only affects people with comorbidities or pre-existing conditions. Like, well, yeah, yes, it only affects humans.
Yeah, exactly.
It only affects 90% of the general population, or whatever percentage. It maybe isn't 90, but that, you know, the point. It's certainly more than 50. So, and again, it's of course we're underreporting it. And it will know more in a year, and we'll know more, even more than that, in 2 years. And just like we know more about polio today than we did during the outbreaks of polio, just like we know more about influenza now than we did in 1919. Yeah. Not that it was a new disease in 1919, but so it'll be, yeah.
Yeah, I think, like, they've already learned so much about it just since in the last 10 months, right?
Yeah.
So imagine what we're going to know next year after, you know, we've had X number of vaccinations, and, you know, everywhere is kind of, you know, trying to get back to normal. We'll have so much more information.
Yeah. No, and it's important to know, and it's, like we've said so many times, like, we see the light at the end of the tunnel, and now is not the time to get stupid. Like, let's continue to wear the masks, continue to socially distance. It's hard. It's so incredibly hard.
I know. I know a lot of people this Christmas were really, really unhappy about not being able to see their family and stuff. And I get it. I mean, I get to see my dad regularly anyway because we got to work together sometimes. So I don't really have the same effect as everybody else. But I mean, I do get that this is a time of year you usually spend with your loved ones and you don't get to see them. And it sucks, but it's probably next year will be okay.
Yeah.
So let's, yeah.
No, and I had to do a Zoom call with my parents and my sister. They're out in BC, and that was not great.
Not as good.
I spent Christmas Eve alone this year. My kids were with their mom. Now they still they live with me full time effectively. So even on the times where they're with her, they still come back here to sleep. So I got to see them at the end of the night when their Christmas Eve was done. So I still got to end my night with them, which was great.
Right.
But I get that it's not fun to be alone, but there's people who deal with that every year for Christmas. That's the reality for a number of people every year.
Yeah.
And it's, I joked I got to get in touch with my Jewish heritage and eat Chinese food and watch a movie.
There you go. Yeah.
Didn't go out to the movie theater, but like I said, there's the light at the end of the tunnel. It's just it's easy to get sloppy at the end. And I think I think we're really entering into what could be a dangerous time because I think people they're done with it. My kids and I got invited to a movie party where person rented a movie theater and was going to have 20 or 30 people all go, and it was going to be socially distanced. I'm just like, that's for me that even if people are being safe, it was beyond my risk threshold. It was more than 20 people in an enclosed space, and if it was just a normal night at the movies, I'd almost probably feel safer because it would be strangers who I can't trust as much, but it's strangers who I won't be tempted to get a little closer than 6 feet when talking.
Yeah, that's right.
And conversely, though, a brilliant idea. My kids and I are going to go to a drive-by birthday party tomorrow where everyone's meeting in a central location. We're going to, in our cars, we're not getting out of our cars.
Right.
Been invited to decorate the cars if we wish. And then we're going to drive by the birthday boy's house in our cars and wave and honk. And and my sons are friends with them, of course, which is why I'm going, because I don't just go to kids' birthday parties for no reason. But people are adapting and finding ways, right? To me, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
And so we just need to make sure we're doing more of that, and real people are getting vaccinated already. This isn't just mythological people. These are real people that are getting the vaccine, and it's coming. And we can make it to the end, and it's going to be, when we look back, we'll get the full weight of the tragedy that happened in the interim. But we don't need to make that tragedy even worse by getting sloppy near the end.
Yeah, that's right. And I know that there are people who did, break the Saskatchewan restrictions to go see family, but there was a lot of other people who chose to not, and I mean, we just gotta keep being careful, please.
And I've talked about this before, the tragedy of the commons, where I can get away with it as long as none of my neighbors do, so I'll try. And then if everyone has that mentality, everyone tries to get away with it, and all of a sudden no one's following the rules.
That's right.
And we just got to accept that there's going to be people who are creative, quote unquote, with how they follow the rules, or find loopholes, or stick to the letter of the law, or bend it just a little bit. And it sucks that the rest of us pay the price and lose out on Christmas and lose out on, maybe lockdowns ending a week later than they otherwise would have, or 2 weeks later, or a month later. But Like literally, this is causing death.
Yeah.
So yeah, it sucks that I have to do more than some of my neighbors will. But I'm still gonna do it.
Yeah, that's right.
So.
Yeah. I mean, it sucks that I have to sanitize my car in between passengers all day, every day, but I do it. It's got to be done.
Yeah, and of course you do, right? Of course you do.
Yeah, you have to. I don't. Yeah, I don't want my car to be the reason that somebody got ill.
Yeah,
and I don't want to get ill myself. Right.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
So.
What else do we want to talk about?
What else? Yeah.
Now there's.
I guess we could talk about our new restrictions in Saskatchewan.
Okay, we can talk about that. Stick to COVID.
Yeah, we're still
the retail restrictions.
Yeah, we've got a little bit more limiting shops to 50% capacity. And the province requires large retail locations to limit capacity to 25%.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, actually, that is the kind of restriction that I am fully on board with. I think that's, I think that will help. I've been saying a lot lately that workplaces and retail locations where people are working, that it's a major risk factor. And I couldn't wrap my head around the limiting of capacities in homes, but not limiting the number of customers in various businesses.
Yeah.
So I'm on board with this until we get things under control. This is, I think, exactly what we need to be doing.
Well, and like as of today, effectively it should be fairly easy for a while because yes, there's always a spike on Boxing Day for shopping. It's is what it is. And some places will do Boxing Week and they stay kind of busy. But for the most part, as you move into the last week of, as you move into December 28th and onwards, and for the month of January, retail sales drop dramatically.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Like this is already a really slow time of year. So I suspect requiring retail businesses to maintain a 50% capacity is not going to be an issue. And the whole large retailers maintaining 25%, like their capacity is already huge.
Yeah,
right? I don't know what the official capacity of your average Walmart is.
But it's a lot.
But it's a lot. It is greater than it needs to be. So 25% capacity in Walmart. I doubt you're going to have people lining up. I highly doubt there's going to be lineups outside of a Walmart. There'll be lineups outside of some stores, but not many over the next month. I don't think so. And
if I would be in favor of it if the restrictions were even more extreme. So hopefully the numbers shift and we don't have to do that. But yeah, I'm just thinking about like the curbside pickup that was going on at Best Buy during the initial lockdown. And like you had to call ahead and then go pick up your stuff. You couldn't go in the store. And it wasn't perfect, but it worked, right? If you needed something, you could still get it. So
yeah, no, that was good. And like my son had an eye appointment, and it was a medical appointment. He needs to go.
Right.
And it turned out he needed glasses, which we kind of had, and that's why I say he needed to go, because we knew that it had reached the point where if he didn't, it was going to cause things to get worse. But again, it was the shopping for glasses, and the eye place just flat out had a rule: you could not enter their store if you didn't have an appointment.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and someone showed up. He's like, I want to just take a look for a couple pairs of glasses. And the store was empty except for us. And she's like, not without an appointment. Like, I can book you in for one tomorrow at this time.
Yeah.
And my older son had a pair of glasses that had been on order and were to pick up. And even just that, even just stopping in the store to pick up the pair that had already good, just to pick them up, I needed to book in advance. And it wasn't long to book. It was a quick phone call. And I believe I could have done it through text or their website as well. But it was just like, you know what? We'd rather be safe. We'd rather, like, yes, we know it's only 2 minutes in and out. We know it's pretty straightforward. But you're still physically entering the store. And there was the contact tracing. So when you arrive, you fill out the form. And I was glad. Like, that was one of the few times I've entered or I've left my house other than my doing grocery shopping every 2 weeks. And I've gone back to bi-weekly instead of weekly again.
Right.
And yeah, like I think there needs to be things in place to help people who are struggling, like our small businesses that are struggling. But keeping people safe. Again, I talked about when we were talking about water, right? Keeping people safe is the first principle of why we exist as a society. So
yeah, that's right.
It's
not for profits.
Yeah. Speaking of supports, unanimous support from Parliament a couple weeks ago. New wage subsidies starting up again. So we've gone from CERB to SUS.
Yeah.
Slightly different this time around. Like logistically. Thoughts?
Yeah. I don't know. I would like to see more direct support for individuals who aren't necessarily employed at one of the places that is gonna get a wage subsidy, but I guess it's better than nothing. So, and there are still some programs that people can apply for. Yeah. They just have a lot of loopholes that you might fall through. So hopefully this fills a gap for some people, and I'm not sure if I didn't how much of a percentage of 75%.
75% until March 13th.
Yeah,
so 3 months.
So that's a significant support for businesses who won't have the same income, and they can keep their employees.
Yep.
So
continuity is good. I think one of the things where I think this is valuable to businesses is you do get to have that continuity of employees. I think without this, you'd see a lot more businesses lay people off for now, and then when they rehire in 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, they're hiring different people because their old employees had to find work elsewhere. Yeah. So you have lost value there. It's you're paying for training at that point, as opposed to paying someone who already knows how to do the job. So I think that's better for everyone all around when, if they can keep their existing employees. So all in all, I think it's good. I mean, I think I agree with you on that. I'd also rather see more money go to people directly, but
yeah, okay, so I quit my job, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people say, okay, well then fuck yeah, you don't deserve any help when you quit your job. And our system is very much like that, generally. Yeah. So instead of working in the oil field, I am a gig economy worker, which essentially means that I'm self-employed.
Yeah.
And as a self-employed person, I am not eligible for any of the supports that exist, really. I could apply for the CRA the straight CRB.
Yeah.
And if you make over $38,000 in a year, then they claw back dollar for dollar until you pay it back, essentially. So there aren't a lot of supports for somebody like me. So I find myself seeing Americans with a $600 check coming to them from the government. And I go, damn, I could sure use $600, right? Yeah. But also, this is I see the way that we are doing things, and I can't say that they're entirely wrong. I just think that there needs to be something for people who are not in a position to get EI or, the common supports. My partner, she hasn't had any income at all this year because she was in the middle of her immigration she was switching, applying for permanent residence for the first 6 months, which took an extra 2 months because of COVID.
Yeah.
And so we know a number of people who are new Canadians who have fallen through the cracks. There were many students who fell through the cracks for CRB, for the CERB, and it's just, we're too hung up, I feel, as a society on making sure that everybody deserves the help that we give them instead of just giving people help and figuring it out much later.
Right.
Which it was the proposed idea at the very start was, we're going to help people and figure it out later. But then somewhere along the line, it became much more like, instead, we're going to start restricting who we help.
Yeah.
And as a person who believes in a universal basic income, this is not something that I consider a good way of doing things.
Yeah. Oh, I hear you. I think had we use this as the opportunity to test out UBI and see what that could do, and that, again, going back to, we have collectively owned wealth that we all do own a share of. So those are just dividends. What people refer to as UBI is functionally a citizenship dividend.
Yeah.
And again, I kind of alluded to this earlier. You start getting a little into deep philosophical waters when you talk about, who's a citizen and why is citizenship important, and who does this wealth belong to and who does Canada belong to. But ultimately, at the end of the day, in the model we have now, even in the model we have now, and I think divesting ourselves of a citizenship model, I think would become even more equitable, ideally. But within the citizenship model, UBI is nothing other than a citizenship dividend. We are all stakeholders, and in this entity that we call Canada, we all, as stakeholders, we are entitled to our dividend checks, just like stakeholders or shareholders in a company would be.
Yeah.
And I think you can work things such that UBI is that dividend. Now, we get those dividends in other ways currently, in terms of social safety nets and healthcare and whatnot, but education. I think a basic UBI, though, really underscores that and gives people, and again, feeds into that conservative and libertarian idea that people spend money better than governments. I disagree with them on that to a large extent in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I think, again, economies of scale can do a lot of things better. But if you honestly believe that people are going to spend this better, pay them their dividends of, that they get for ownership in this collective entity.
Yeah.
And let them spend that money in ways that they see fit.
Funnily enough, I am in opposition to many of my left-wing cohorts when I advocate for a UBI. Many, and it's kind of it's not Saskatchewan specific, but left-wing people are usually against a UBI because it isn't the change of ownership of the means of production. It is it maintains the power structure that is in the current system that it is in. The reason that I'm pro UBI is because it could reduce the amount of suffering that is currently happening while we still don't have a change of the ownership of the means of production.
Right.
So
Yeah.
So it's yeah. UBI, let's do it.
And it's not like the two aren't compatible. Like
Right.
the way you implement a UBI as a citizenship dividend, it's the dividend created by the resources that are collectively owned currently. There's nothing saying additional means of production cannot be assumed collectively and added in to that dividend.
Yeah.
So whether whether you believe every form of production should be collectively owned, at which point, okay, fine, your widget factory now is owned by the province of Saskatchewan, and the profits from your widget factory are added into this UBI distribution.
Yeah.
Or whether you say, okay, no, maybe not all means of production, but critical ones, so oil, gas, any utility, telecommunications, that sort of thing. You collectively own all critical infrastructure production. And that, there's middle grounds and ways of doing that. We don't have to just say natural resources,
Right.
which is kind of functionally what we do now. Like our natural resources are still largely collectively owned, and then we sell them off through royalties, as opposed to we don't really ever sell the land the oil is on, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Even with the most right-wing governments we've had, the state still maintains the means of production when it comes to most natural resources. We just sell access to it.
Yeah.
And whether we stick to that level of extreme, or you go to the other end of extremity and say, all production is owned by the state, or you find somewhere in the middle. None of that negates the existence of UBI in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. Let's just get money in the hands of people who need it.
Yep. I was going to say, I'll turn you into a capitalist yet, but no.
Seems pretty unlikely.
Seems pretty unlikely. I think sort of the last story of the week, I'm trying to remember if you and I talked about this or if I've just talked about this with other people, but the judge who visited the protest camp. Did we talk about this last week?
I don't think we did.
I don't think. Yeah. Okay. It was someone else this week I've had this conversation with.
Okay.
Maybe the story came up. So the judge who visited Justin DeRoche's protest is coming up for a judicial review. So. So he'll have a review by his fellow judges. I struggled to sort of weed my way through the full story. And again, this is one of those ones where I think a certain degree of privacy and anonymity is inherent within how these types of things get reported. So I think that impacted this a bit.
Yeah.
But essentially, a judge visited the teepee.
Yeah. He was also, this was the judge that ruled that the teepee could stay, right? Mm-hmm. And then
that is my understanding. The news story is very convoluted when they talk about that.
Yeah.
And they tend to have a lot of, just the way the story is written gives a fact and then a bunch of background and then another fact about the story and then a bunch of background. So you're weeding through it all to extract the bits and pieces that are relevant. And I understand why. They want to make sure context is given throughout, right. But it made it a little bit thick to read through, even though it's a fairly short story.
Right. Yeah. It's still not straightforward.
No. But yeah, ultimately, this judge is undergoing a judicial review. Province says they're not allowed to talk about it.
Due to complaints.
We cannot confirm if it was a member of the government who submitted a complaint in an official capacity, because any member of the public can make a complaint about a judge's conduct. One of the things I said to it was actually my ex-wife and I were talking. I'm remembering the conversation now. One of the things I was saying about it was, to some extent, it's one of those things where I'm somewhat disappointed in this specific circumstance that he's being, like, that he is getting a review. However, as far as underlying principles go, I'm actually really glad that any member of the public can lodge a complaint about a judge, and that judge must be accountable for their actions. Like, the fact that there aren't hoops to jump through to have this happen is probably a good thing. The fact that if a judge does something inappropriate, all it takes is one person saying, hey, that was inappropriate, and a review panel is convened to address that. Now, whether or not this is consistently applied, I would be curious to see.
Right.
But from everything I've read in this specific case, it really just came down to, they raised a complaint that was sufficiently serious, and regardless of the merits of the complaint, a review panel is convened.
Yeah.
And I like, philosophically, I like that. It's unfortunate in this case. And again, what we could end up finding, though, is he goes in front of the panel, all 5 judges say, no, you did nothing wrong, and it's dismissed, and it's fine.
I hope that's what happens.
Yeah. Again, I'd be curious about the law as far as why, if let's say he is found to require remedial training, because it seems like in extreme circumstances he could lose his judgeship, but for the most part, the article seemed to imply the most serious thing that could happen in this specific case, or is likely to happen in this specific case, would be he'd have to, go to training for, spend his Saturday in a course or something. Which, again, it's an admonishment that shows up on his record and whatnot, and I'm sure there are more serious consequences that are subtle and unofficial that we just don't understand because we're not lawyers.
Yeah.
But yeah, so go on.
I don't know. I'm thinking, like, okay, obviously, if it's a general member of the public, you don't want to know. They should be able to stay anonymous to some degree about their complaint. My thought is that if it's a member of the government, though, then they should almost be telling us, right? Like, I don't know. Maybe that's too much, but
yeah. If they are complaining as a member of the government, yes.
Right.
Like, I think that's one of those ones too, and it's always tough when politicians have to act in multiple roles, right? Like, if a politician is acting just as a citizen, do they still have the right to act as just a citizen? Going back,
they have political influence, right? Whether they're acting as a citizen or not.
Well, and like I think back to the Trudeau scandal like 4 years ago, where he was he had a conversation with Wilson Raybould, and the issue was he was having that conversation as an MP, not as a prime minister, and he had the right to have that conversation as an MP. But it was questionable about whether he would have the right to have that conversation as prime minister.
Yeah. And how do you even separate those?
How do you separate the two? And you can say, and it sounded like he said, I'm asking you this, or I'm saying, like, I am not ordering this as a prime minister. I am asking this as as a member of parliament. Do you lose? And again, same sort of thing here. If you're doing something just as a citizen, but you're also an MP, if it even was an MP,
right? Yeah, we don't even know,
or premier or cabinet minister or whatnot, right? So we'll see. It says the panel can dismiss the complaints. And the panel can recommend remedial training or coaching. If the matter is considered serious enough, a public inquiry could be called, at which point that public inquiry could result in the judge's removal. Right. So even they can't remove the judge. They could just call for an inquiry that would lead to that. And it sounds like Mitchell has a long career that has been a very solid, respectable, reputable career. I got to assume, and again, maybe I'm wrong because people make mistakes. I got to assume he understood the law and understood what was appropriate and what would be a conflict and what wouldn't be a conflict.
Well, like you say, because he visited after the ruling.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like he broke any. I mean, I don't know the law, but
yeah.
it seems like it's on the up and up to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this wouldn't be a law. This would be a guideline. Like Pirates of the Caribbean. It's a guideline. Yeah. No, but it would sound like it is an ethics rule rather than a law, like, or a conflict of interest guideline.
Yeah.
But again, it's it seems weird that actions that occurred after the ruling could be considered inappropriate.
Yeah.
And honestly, even if they did happen before, as long as they weren't hidden, that would be the thing for me. Is if you're secretly going, it's not the judge's place to be secretly investigating things. But if the judge publicly said, as part of my deliberation, I wish to go see in person, I don't know whether the law allows for that. Like, again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know whether the law does allow for that. But personally, I think the law should allow for that.
Right.
So, like, even if it was ahead of time, I don't know if it's wrong, but I don't think it necessarily should be. And then again, maybe, if there's lawyers listening to the show and go, okay, no, there's good, valid reasons for why a judge shouldn't do that.
That would be great to hear.
I'd be super curious to hear that. But I love DeRoche. He said, like, Justin's quote was, to the politicians who are going to scream bias, 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 because a judge who signed his decision wanted to see the freedom of expression and freedom of religion that his profession is supposed to be fighting and rooting for, by all means go ahead, because you just look that much more ridiculous. And I don't, again, he's a pretty incredible man.
Yeah.
I think his words cut to the chase, or cut to the point. The law doesn't exist in a vacuum, and it's easy for you and I in our own homes with our fancy microphones, warm and comfortable and miles away, to talk about it and think about it philosophically and theoretically. But the fact that a judge wanted to actually see the real world implications of the decisions he makes, such that they are not purely theoretical, but actually see the flesh and blood impact of his occupation, I think is great. Yeah. I think the premier should have gone down to the camp too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right? I think we both do. And I think this idea of divorcing political and legal decisions from the realities of the people they impact is a bad philosophy, is a bad way of thinking of things. And so this, I think more judges should do what Mitchell did, and I'm happy he did it. And I really hope that now that the panel, or when the panel does convene to meet on this, we get a unanimous decision and them completely vindicating his actions. So, and again, the flip side of that thought is, I'm still kind of glad that the panel can occur, because judges are powerful as fuck, and any check on the power of the powerful is a good check and balance in my mind. So I'm glad the panel can exist. I just really hope that what they find is he did nothing wrong. So
and the only other thing that I think about it is that I hope that one group of powerful people, namely politicians, cannot use this kind of tool to benefit themselves politically.
Yeah.
I don't want to see, a conservative premier say, have a judge lose his seat because he disagreed with what he did and it didn't work out for him. Right.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I think that's one of the things about this is the panel that's reviewing it is 5 other judges.
yeah.
And we've done a good job in Canada of all the things where we fucked up. One of the things we've done well is keep our judiciary fairly independent.
Yeah.
Now, our judiciary still exists in a white capitalist middle upper class paradigm, and is largely drawn from is drawn from the powerful to begin with and given more powers. Like, there are issues still there, and they still will enforce a very specific social paradigm. That said, in Canada, we've done a very good job of ensuring our judges stay politically neutral. Just seems wrong, but like politically nonpartisan. That's probably. I don't think it's possible for judges to be neutral because we're all humans, but they can be nonpartisan.
Yeah.
And I think that is critical, and I think we've done a good job on that. So again, hopefully these 5 judges look at that. And I'm curious as to what their decision. If there is something that you and I just don't understand as to why what he did was wrong, I'd be curious to hear that. And then that comes down to, is the rule what it should be?
Right.
Like their job is going to be to determine whether he followed the rules. Then as a society, we can step in and go, okay, well, if he broke the rules, maybe we shouldn't have that rule in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we've beaten it to death tonight.
Yeah. It seemed like we had a pretty heavy topics tonight. I guess we always do. Just this week just in contrast to everything else that's going on in the world.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be this. I have a living room full of Lego in the other room, so this was more of a contrast than usual.
Right.
We'll get back to the video games and the Lego. Yeah. That's the normal post-Christmas fare.
Get out of the darkness and back into the fun.
Yeah. So, but thank you again for all you do to make the magic happen.
For sure.
We'll see what we can talk about in a week's time.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see here. Anchor.fm/from many peoples. You can follow us on Twitter at skpoliticspod, facebook.com/from many peoples strength pod, and you can email us at frommanypeoples@gmail.com. I once again, I got to give a shout out to @Novembromancer on Twitter and at HomefireSK for sharing the show and saying nice things about us.
Yay, thank you.
That's 2 weeks in a row they've retweeted the show and been
that's wonderful and kind of them for doing so. I really appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, thanks, David, for joining me.
Thank you, Cory, and have a happy New Year.
You too.